I don't know if you're watching the Phillies or anybody is anymore. I'm not. I'm not going to say that I'm the one. But
yeah, no comment.
They had a shot last night. The game was 5-4. They ended up losing like 9-4. The Braves lost last night. I mean, quietly, they could have kind of snuck back into this thing with the Braves looming, the chance to control your own destiny, Frank. But just kind of the way the month of September has gone, they end up getting bombed in the 8th or the top of the 9th last night, and they go down to the Braves. But, man, it would have been interesting if they could have got that thing down to 5 or 4 and a half before the Braves came to town before they went to Atlanta. But this has just been a disastrous month for this team.
Yeah, and you're right. It would have been kind of fun, or at least it would have given you some sort of incentive to really pay close attention.
Put a little pressure on them.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? I think if you really want to say, take a step back and think about what this season was supposed to be about, you really wanted to know who's in and who's out. And the idea was that the Phillies were going to spend some money this offseason. So you wanted to clear out of the way anybody that you thought really is not a long-term asset. And if nothing else, the Phillies probably can look at their roster and say for sure one way or the other that this guy is in or this guy is out. And at least having seen some of the ups and downs from some of these players, it probably is a sign for the long term that the Phillies need to look for other solutions, and perhaps that's a good thing in the end.
Arrieta last night, I mean, obviously, look, a lot of people don't like the signing. They see the $30 million. But, and look, I don't think he's pitched particularly well down this stretch where the whole team has not played well. But in the future, they're not going to be able to get rid of him. He's getting paid a lot of money over the next 2 years. But do you see him as a fit for this team, next year, the year after that? Or is there a way they can, possibly do something there?
I think he's a great fit for this team. I think what they badly needed was a veteran who was not going to just be a disaster. I mean, when you consider the alternative, if the Phillies didn't have Jake Arrieta, then Ben Lively, who is now pitching for the Kansas City Royals, would have had to be in your rotation along with Zach Eflin to start the year. You wouldn't have had the opportunity for Eflin to sort of fight that away from him / Lively lose it. And if Lively had lost it and there was no alternative, if there was no Zach Eflin in the minor league to start the season, this would have been a major disaster for the Phillies. And you might just say, well, that's just one starting pitcher, but the effects it has on a young bullpen, we saw a lot of the young relievers on this Phillies team really develop along the way. And if you don't have Jake Arrieta being a rather steady force, even though, yeah, he's not the Jake Arrieta of old, he hasn't been that great, but without him, I think you would have never sniffed contention if you're the Phillies, and I think right now they'd be looking a heck of a lot worse, and I think people would feel a lot worse about this Phillies team, even though they had this swoon.
We're talking with Frank Klose, the Phillies Mailbag, as you can always send your mailbag questions to Frank at Frank Klose with a K, and of course we read them off here on the Tuesday edition of the Sports Bash. And when you look at the mailbag, there's so many questions we're going to get into in this offseason. But let's start with this one from Larry. Who of these outfielders will actually be with the Phillies next year? Herrera, Roman Quinn, Nick Williams, and obviously Rhys Hoskins. They've been getting the most time. Altair is now up here. So how's the outfield fit for you next year?
Yeah, it's a shame because I think the Phillies really hoped they would have some really good answers from Odubel Herrera being a big piece to go forward. I think they would have hoped to have seen a lot more of Roman Quinn than they've seen, and they've certainly seen a good amount of him as of late. But Aaron Altair kind of falling off the face of the planet, that certainly complicates things because he did not step in and claim a starting job. And, I hope we really don't go back to some of the audio we had before the season began because I thought he was the underrated name that was going to surprise people, but it turned out he surprised people in the other direction. Nick Williams made some strides, but, I think, unfortunately, because of Herrera's struggles, because of Quinn's injury, because of Rhys Hoskins not playing a stellar left field, I think it's almost like there are more questions than there were things answered during this season. So I tend to think that a lot will hinge upon who the Phillies sign. Now, the Phillies are going to spend a lot of money. Now the obvious name for the outfield that's a free agent is Bryce Harper. But there are other options out there. A lot of them I've still yet to break down, but But it seems like long-term you might have to talk about Rhys Hoskins not being in the outfield. I think Roman Quinn is a tremendous piece so far and shows that when he's healthy, he can do a lot of really good things for the Phillies. And, certainly his defense is tremendous. You may have noticed the last couple of weeks, if you're watching the games, that he bumped Odubel Herrera to a corner outfield spot a couple times. So I think that the fact that they're doing that is they're really trying to see what they have going forward still, even in this last couple of weeks that are left, because they don't have all the answers. So what I think what's going to be the big thing that happens is they try to get their big name, big bat. Maybe it's Harper, maybe it's somebody else. And then I think then at that point they have to figure out where the pieces lie, because, it's really hard to say that Odubel Herrera is going to be a starter that's going to give you consistent at-bats. It's hard to say that Roman Quinn's going to be a consistent injury-free outfielder, even though he looks tremendous. And which Aaron Altair is it? Is it the one that's just been doing very well since the September recall, or is it the one that was batting in the 100s and had to go to AAA to everybody's dismay? So, and even Nick Williams, decent player, had a really good year. I think his right arm does not really fit for right field. So then what happens in left field? So there's almost more questions than answers this year. So, and by the way, there's one name I will kind of rule out for the future, and I think that's Dylan Cousins. The fact that he's not getting much work right now, I think the Phillies kind of see him as a quadruple A type player, somebody who might be really, really good at AAA and just shy of a major leaguer. And he might be the type that bounces back and forth if there's injury. But other than that, I don't think he's part of their long-term plans.
Frank, you mentioned Rhys Hoskins in first base, which leads me into the next question from Michael. Why is Carlos Santana playing so much third base? Are the Phillies considering actually moving him there?
Yeah, it's really funny because a couple weeks ago on my podcast, I was saying that there was, I asked the question, would you give Carlos Santana some starts at third base just to sort of boost this offense a little bit and try to get Justin Bour in there maybe once or twice? And the Phillies did that right away. But now that they've faded, Carlos Santana is actually being penciled into the lineup at third base rather frequently, even so that Rhys Hoskins can get some starts at first base. And you have to at least ask yourself, could this be something that the Phillies are at least thinking about for the future? And, when I look at Carlos Santana at third base, does he have a good arm for third base? I think yes. Does he have good hands? I think yes. His catching experience gave him a lot of tools like that often was why back in the day, if you moved out from behind the plate, you moved to third base. What he doesn't seem to have is decent range at third base. Now, he hasn't been a disaster. He's made the normal plays. He's even made a couple nice plays. I know he caught one ball in foul territory, made a nice play on that after running a ways. But I think that Carlos Santana probably isn't somebody who can do more than fill in for a few days here or there when you need him. So maybe that ability is something that you use to play a lefty like Justin Bour in the future if you keep Justin Bour, or maybe that makes him more tradable. I think the Phillies might need to consider trading Carlos Santana, not because now look, there's a lot of people out there that when I see the comments online, people don't like Carlos Santana because he had a bad April. But, if you look at his numbers, he's sitting over 300 in September, 400 on base. His whole body of work for the season really isn't that bad, even though the batting average says so. And he did walk 100 times. No Philly has done that in 10 years. So he's done a lot of really good things. I think just people had the expectation that he would come in and be some sort of superstar. But instead, he's been a very, very good player. And I think that if the Phillies feel like they're forced and they have to move Rhys Hoskins back to first base, there might be a taker for somebody like Santana. And maybe, just maybe, showing that a team that acquires him can throw him at third base for a few days and not have any major disasters might be an extra incentive to trade for him.
Frank, Rick wants to know, who are you keeping in the Phillies bullpen?
Now, this is actually an interesting question because, I was looking at the Phillies' last win when the bullpen came in and gave 7 innings of relief. And there's a lot of names in that bullpen that are actually been pretty good for the Phillies this year. Now, the 2 veteran arms, they've ended up being pretty good for the Phillies down the stretch. Pat Neshek, when he finally got healthy. And Tommy Hunter, he had that awful first half and that awful start to his career. But he's been very, very good for the Phillies lately. So you kind of want to hope that those two veteran arms can help anchor you next year. And then working backwards in that game, you looked at Hector Neris, who's had a bit of a rebirth. He was reliever of the month last month. Yesterday, he got into a little bit of trouble, but that was really the first time since really of significance. And then Ed O'Brien Ramos looks good. So there you have four, and we haven't even begun to talk about Sir Anthony Dominguez, who probably is a little bit gassed at this point, but figures to be a late end option for the Phillies going forward. And Victor Arano gave the Phillies a tremendous season to really start off his first full major league season. So I think they're looking pretty good. Luis Avalon is around next year. The Phillies has control of him. Hasn't pitched much since he came over. But really what's left for the Phillies to get, maybe they get a solid lefty, or maybe they go in on Craig Kimbrell just to have the lockdown closer type. But they actually have most of their pieces there, and of all the places on the roster, the Phillies bullpen is one that actually is pretty set.
Frank Klose, the Phillies playing out the string, I guess we could say, as they lose last night on a night where the Braves lost. Could have made this weekend a lot more interesting. We'll see where it goes. The Phillies, obviously, a very disappointing month of September, and you can really suggest that that week where they played Atlanta played Boston and the Phillies were playing the Mets and the Marlins really was the difference of where this season went south for them, because they could not gain any ground when the Braves went 3-4 that week. And it just this has just been an awful month of September for the Phils. But plenty more on the Phillies at 97.3 ESPN.com. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, guys.